Hi everyone, I'm going to show you how to make a easy Christmas crown or party crown that is adjustable. Well, it's adjustable, but you can make one size and it will fit a children's head or an adult's head, even big heads. So this is one I had done on a sew along. And as you can see, it lays out flat when you're not using it, which means they store very easy. And you can make lots of different designs on them. This particular one, I used just some bias tape just to create a line here and some bias tape at the bottom. And it has two pieces of ribbon at the end, so you can then wrap that and that creates a Christmas crown. Now this one, the starting measurements were 12 inches by 6 inches. But what we found is that when that's round an adult's head, this section is just before your ear. So although that's fine, they looked a bit like a bonnet. So I'm going to show you how to do it, but I've made the measurements slightly different. So let's move that out of the way. So you're going to need two pieces of fabric, and I have interfaced both of these. It doesn't even need to be Christmas fabric. I'm just using a piece of scrap that I had. But you want to interface both of these in whatever interfacing you have. I was just using some light interfacing. But what I've done is I've cut it 18 inches across and 6 inches high. And you can do this on paper. I'm going to cheat and I'm just going to use I'm going to draw it directly onto the interfacing at the back. Hang on, wait, is that the interface side or is that the interface side? That's the interfacing side, okay. So for the purpose of this video, I am using a biro, but you might not want to use a biro on your fabric just in case it shows through. I'm not so worried because I'm using this blue fabric, so it's not too bad. I've also cut two pieces, oh you can't see because of the white. I've cut two pieces of ribbon and these are about 9 inches long. On the first crown I did, the ribbon was about 12 inches long, but I don't actually think it needs to be that long, so I've done 9 inches. Now on your crown, on the back, the first thing you want to do is measure 1/4 of an inch from the top, and I'm just going to draw a line because the seam allowance is 1/4 of an inch, so I don't want anything that I draw to go beyond that. So I've drawn 1/4 of an inch and you can just about see that on camera. The next thing I'm going to do, and if we look at this one, for example, I measured 3 inches up to start my first point. That's not a bad height, but for this one, I'm gonna do 2.5 inches up. That just makes it slightly lower. But you can do any starting height, and you'll see why I'm making a mark. So I'm just gonna measure up from the bottom and measure up 2.5 inches and make my line. So from the 2.5 inches mark until that 1/4 of an inch line below, this is where you're going to do your design. You can do any design you like. For this one, I just did 4 points. But what that meant when it was turned is that the center of your forehead, that point was at its lowest. So I want to try and make a point at the top. So what I'm going to do is take my fabric and I'm just going to fold it in half, and that creates my center. And so you can do this on paper, so you can do a cool design. So that's my center. Now, because it's 18 inches, that's 9 inches either side. Now I am going to go 1.5 inches from my center mark, which is there. I'm going to do 1.5 inches. Make sure that's lined up. And I'm going to make a mark there. And if I go 1.5 inches, let me go that side. I've got stuff in the way. Lots of stuff in the way. Right. And then let's go 1.5 inches back. Make a mark. So from my center line, you can see I've done a mark in the center, and the base of my triangle is 3 inches across. And then I can line it up. There's one. And there's two. And then what I'm going to do is just mark 3-inch lines. And let me do another one there. 3 inches that side. And then let's go 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So I'm going to do 3-inch triangles at the bottom and then bring them up to the point. So that means I need, let's go from here, 1.5 inches up, and there's my point. And then I can do the same thing again and make my points. And let's do it that way. So 1.5. There's my point, and then I'm actually going to do a 3-inch line there and make my point. And I know this is quite dull to watch, but I'm keeping it with my pointy triangles. As I say, you can do, if you go on Google, you can look at all different Christmas cracker crown designs. If you wanted to do more points, just bear in mind that that's a lot of poking out afterwards, and trying to fold this the right way out. So it can get a bit tricky if you've got very, very tiny triangle points. And let me just finish this off. There's that one. And then there's my last triangle point. Sorry, I'm on a creaky stool today, so I creak every time I lean. Okay, so if I hold this up, there's my crown. And at the end of my crown, there's a little line, but I don't mind that. What you can do as well is you can add, I'll show you in a minute actually. You can add things on the inside. But this is the design I'm going to follow, and I am going to use a 1/4 inch foot to go round each of my triangles. But I'll show you that on the sewing machine. But that is the design I'm going to go for. And then put them right sides together, line them up. And I cut my fabric a bit wonky, but that's okay. And I need my clips. Let's just clip them in. Okay, so what we also need is our ribbon, because we're going to create a sandwich. So we need our ribbon to be about halfway up from the bottom. But we need to sandwich it, so I'm going to sandwich that, and you need a little bit poking out at the bottom. So I'm going to just line it up with my cutting mat, and I'm going to go about the 1 inch mark. And let's just get another clippy and just clip that in place. Now the ribbon has to be in the center of your fabric sandwich, otherwise you won't see the ribbon when it folds out the other way. So this is just the prep Now I did this about the one inch up, so it's roughly, how much was sticking out? About 1/2 inch. Okay, get my another clippy. Right. So my ribbon is now clipped up within the crown. And I'm all clipped up around. Now what we're going to do is we're gonna, and I'll take the camera around to the machine. You're gonna sew 1/4 inch all the way up the side and then follow your line and do 1/4 inch up, down, up, down, up, down until you get to the other end and then come down the side. If you want to use bias tape, bias binding, then leave this whole section unsewn. If you don't want to use bias tape, that's fine. Like if I look at this one, so I just did a little edge there. It means you don't have to sew that side. But if you don't want to use any tape at all, then you can start to sew inwards if you want. Make sure you've got much of a turning gap. But just bear in mind when it does fold out the other way, you've got to try and poke out all of these corners. And what we've found is that can be quite tricky if you've got this turning gap. So I will leave it up to you if you want to sew this in place or not. I'm not going to sew the bottom at all. I'll just make sure that I reverse stitch at the beginning and ends at these corners, just so that the stitches don't come away, because I find that's going to be a lot easier to poke out all of these corners. So I'm going to pause and just get the camera set up in front of the machine, and we're going to do that bit, and then we're going to fold it out the right way and poke all the corners out. So you then essentially have this bit. After that, you can then top stitch across all the tops and just neaten those out, and then we can do bias tape along the bottom. Okay, let's start sewing, and we are using Mr. Mash, if you've seen the rescue video, not restoration. But Mr. Mash is now set up and in the treadle. So I'm just making sure that I am back stitching, because I'm going to be turning this inside out. So I want, well, the right way out. So I want to just make sure that, let's get to there. I want to just make sure that I can turn it well. Okay. So about there. I'm just roughly eyeballing. Oh, I'm so thick. Stop that. Do you know, I just realised I'm following the wrong line. Ooh. All right. It's because I got excited. We're making Christmas crowns. Get that? Right. Because I was following the wrong side of the line. That bit was correct. Stupid. Right. What I want to do is follow this side. I want to go inside. No, do I want to go? I want to go on the line. Oh dear. I think I need a bit more caffeine. All right. I want to be following the actual line I've drawn. All right, make sure it's in the right way. Because of my seam. Excuse me, sorry about that. All right, follow the line that you drew. All the way up. Give it a spin. Down to the bottom. Now, I'm not putting my needle all the way down because you risk it dropping or skipping a stitch. So it only needs to, the needle only needs to be in just enough to create the pivot. So about there. And then let's go again. Let's take that clip out. So I'm not going to make you watch all of that. So I'm just going to pause while I just finish off. But that's what you want to do. Sew on the line that you've made. Not what I just did and did it back to front. Right. All now stitched up. Ignore that bit because that's the bit where I went wrong. I just wasn't thinking. So what we want to do now is that can snip off the end of, is that in camera? Yeah. So snip that off and then snip your corners as close as you're happy to. And then just cut all the way around the triangles that or the crown that you've made. When you get to a top corner, just snip as close as you can. Hang on, let me show you that. Snip as close as you can to your stitch as possible. It just helps to give it a nice crisp edge. And at the bottom of your corners, as careful as you can, snip. Oh, hang on. You want to snip towards your stitch. That will help to just make those a bit sharper as well. So I'm going to do that next and just cut it all around, and then we can fold it out. So it now looks like this, and you can see that I have clipped all the tops, and I know you can't see this, but I've also done a little snippy at the bottoms. And now you can start folding this out. You can see now that the ribbon, I got at that, the ribbon is now, when it folds out, is going to be on the right side. So it's a bit fiddly. Oh, my camera angle's wrong today as well. Sorry. So I'm just using my finger just to poke them through initially. But then I've got a pokey thing that I will use. So once you've poked them all out, pokey thing, there it is. So I've got a pokey. And then just very carefully poke out that point. Don't use a seam ripper or something very sharp because you're just going to poke a hole straight through your stitching. So it takes a bit of patience, but without doing too much force, it will start to poke your corner or your points out as much as you can, so that you're getting your point. So I'm going to carry on. I'm just going to quickly take all the rest of it out so that it's all ready, and then the next job is to top stitch. There you go, that's all folded out now, folded out the right way. The bottom is still, oh, can't even open it. It's because I gave it a press. You fold it out the right way and then give it a quick press. There we go. So you can see that it's because I had interfacing, it's ironed it and slightly stuck it back together. So I've still got the bottom open, but once you've pressed it, it will be a lot crisper. You might find that, and I can see it just a little bit, I've got a slight bit of buckling. Can you see it just there? And that's where I haven't snipped close enough to these stitches, but if you just, by giving it a good press with the iron, it will get a lot of those, the bucklage and creases out. So the next thing I want to do is I am going to top stitch all the way around, but then because I've left the whole thing open, I am going to just baste the very edge of that, and that's going to help me when it comes to adding the bias binding. But what I need to do is change my feet to a 1/8 foot because I'm not very good at eyeballing a 1/8. And then start from the right end. I'm not going to worry so much about back stitching because I'm going to be coming around and then putting the bias tape on anyway. You don't have to top stitch, that's up to you. I just find it just makes the edges nice and neat, and it will also squish down any bucklage if you have any bucklage. Now I'm using a dark colour, unfortunately, so I know you're not going to be able to see this too well, but what I found, and you might find it with yours, and I'm trying to avoid it happening here, when you are top stitching and you get to the very point of your square, your crown, you might find it gets stuck under the feed dogs. If that happens, and I want to try and avoid it, but when it gets to that very top, and you can see that with mine, what I'm actually going to do, now my machine's got a reverse stitch, so I'm actually going to reverse top stitch down just a little bit, put it back into forwards, and then carry on, and it just helps to stop the very point getting caught, because it kind of misses all the feed dogs, and it will start to really buckle under your machine, and then you're going to get a nest appearing. So I'm just going to carry on and just finish top stitching, and then we can add the bias tape. So top stitching is now all done, all the way along and down the sides. And the next thing that I'm going to do is the bias tape. Now, because I did a plain colour, just plain white cotton on the back, I'm not so worried about what it looks like on the inside. Now, I've got some very thin gold, oh, it got stuck on my thread. Some very thin, I think it's 1/2 inch bias tape. You can use any bias tape you want. It doesn't even need to be cut on the bias, because you're doing a straight. It's not going around any bends or anything, so it's quite straight. But I'm going to add just a little bit of bias tape along the bottom, and as I say, I'm not worrying so much about what it looks like on the inside. So when I'm fixing my tape, when that goes on, I'm poking it out just a little bit at the end, because when it folds round, when it does come round, all I will do is just raw edge trim. You can stitch that under if you want, or if you have a better technique for tidying up the bias tape on that end. I'm not going to worry so much. I'm just going to trim that end, because it's going to be stitched, so it's unlikely to fray too much. And plus, this is going to be around the back of the person's head, so you're not actually going to notice it too much. So what I'm going to do is just clip up. There's my clippies. So I'm just going to clip up the bias tape all the way along. Let's say I've cut it a little bit longer than it needed to be, because I'm going to just snip that out at the end. And I am going to, sorry, there you go. What I'm going to do is just stitch in this ditch all the way down, so that that's stitched in, and then I can fold the tape round and then round again, and then I can stitch from that side, so that I'm not getting any stitching on my tape, unless I do it wrong. But it's just to give a little bit of trim on the crown, so I'm going to do that next. So I've now stitched that bias tape in the ditch all the way along, and then the next thing I'm going to do is fold this over like that, and then there's two ways, because it's a crown, I'm not going to do it the conventional way, but what you would normally do is you would fold that over and then fold that round, so that you had so you've got the tape on the back. Because this is such narrow and quite cheapy bias tape, I'm not going to fold this edge over. I'm just going to bend it straight round like that, so that the tape I'm doing this at a terrible angle, I know I am. All right, like that. So it means that the tape at the back, you can see I can see that. So it means when I stitch that way, I can stitch just a little bit more than this tape, so that I can have a nice line of stitching without going back into the tape. That's the theory, but you don't even have to use bias tape. So I will leave it to you however you want to finish off your crown, but that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just fold that round and do a stitch, and then I'm going to trim off those edges. I've just added the tape and very carefully did that stitch, and I nearly got it as very close to the tape as possible. There are some places where you can't even see the line, but I should have put my glasses on. So the crown is now finished. I know, is the angle okay? So the crown is now finished, and when it's taped up at the back, you've then got, oh, you can't see it on the camera. Let's do it like that. You've then got that where I did it with the point at the very center of the hat, and this one will go just beyond the ears when you're putting it on, but it will also fit for a child's head as well, or a quite large head. But as you can see, you don't even need to use Christmas fabric, but they're quite effective if you're not using Christmas fabric. The other good thing is if they get Christmas dinner all over them, you can give them a wash and use them for next year, and you also know that they are going to fit perfectly on people's heads, and not like those paper ones in crackers that slip off and land in your dinner, or they fall off the back of your chair and people are only wearing them for a few minutes and then taking them off. With these ones, you can make them quite unique. You can as well, if you wanted to, because you can, I mean, you can really use your imagination with this. You can stitch in someone's on their name, so each family member have got their own crown. They can have their name on it. You can add little dangly things. I should have mentioned that before. If you wanted to add little tassels or bells or dangly things, you at the point where you're making your sandwich, your fabric sandwich, and you insert your ribbon, you would have to insert your any dangly things that you have at that point, so that when you fold it out the right way, all your dangly things are on the exterior of the fabric and not tucked inside the lining. I should have mentioned that before. You can also add, if you wanted to, some applique, or you can stick things on. There are so many things that you can do with a Christmas crown with this sort of design. You can, if you Google design shapes of crowns, you can make so many different ones, and they're really simple to use, and you can use your scrap fabric for it. And if you've got any cheap and nasty bias binding, which is what I've got, that doesn't really work for other things, but in this case it works really well as a binding on the bottom of the crown. But I hope you like that. I will put the measurements in the little notes section on YouTube as well, so you've got all the ingredients that you need to make your crown.